Chapter 28. Buteyko is invited to Chicago, but tacitly forbidden to go. It was the end of July. Just over 3 months ago, the 8th five-year plan had been adopted to thunderous applause at the 23rd Congress of the Communist Party, and Brezhnev assumed the title of General Secretary. Party leaders promised far-reaching economic reforms that would, among other things, support greater scientific and technological progress. It appeared that long-awaited winds of change were blowing. The Soviet Union began to widen its international links, and on the 20th of July, President de Gaulle arrived on an official visit, his first since December 1944. National papers carried his photograph, and the General Secretary declared on television that the Soviet Union was ready to cooperate with any country in the advancement of science and the economy. Buteyko watched all this with pleasure. On the 19th of July, it received a form from Who's Who for his biographical details, accompanied by an official invitation to visit the US on a lecture tour about his discovery. This was his big chance. Who's Who only included the most eminent world figures, and his inclusion would mean a great deal. And for the first time in all these long, difficult years, he would have the opportunity to talk directly about his discovery of the diseases of deep breathing to an international audience. After a lecture tour in the US, no one would be able to put the genie of his discovery back in the bottle. Besides, the US was a rich country with enormous financial and technical resources. It was entirely possible that he might be able to start up a Soviet-US laboratory or even an entire research institute. American billionaires wouldn't hesitate to part with a few $1 million for the sake of their own health. In any case, risk-taking was innate to the American pioneering spirit. Such were the doctor's reflections as he sat with the international airmail envelope lying in front of him on his desk. Naturally, he was aware that relations between the US and the USSR could be better, to put it mildly. The Soviet press harshly condemned the US war on Vietnam and published sickening reports of atrocities committed by US soldiers. However, if you were to believe the Communist Party, no one in the USSR wanted to continue the Cold War, and the slogan "Peace and Friendship Between Nations" often resounded from party podiums. And after all, Buteyko reassured himself, the French president was visiting. The US and France were both Western powers. There couldn't be such a great difference between them. A few days later, it occurred to Buteyko that he should ask permission from his superiors before answering the letter. A reply that did not suit them would be unlikely to reach its destination. He therefore set off to see the administration of the Siberian branch of the Academy of Sciences. The pop-eyed official long examined the letter. From the man's unnaturally fixed expression, Buteyko guessed that his visit had been expected. Probably the authorities had already been informed that he had received an invitation from overseas. There was a long, uneasy pause. "You see," said the official eventually, stubbing out his unfinished cigarette in a metal ashtray, "the branch president and his first deputy have also received the same invitation." "Really?" Buteyko half got up from the soft armchair. They didn't reply. "But you can do what you want." The official suddenly thrust the envelope back at the doctor and hurriedly left the room. The man's words echoed in Buteyko's mind as he left the massive administration building. If the branch president hadn't answered, it was clear what a lowly researcher should want to do. It was as if the official had thrust a knife into his heart. The president and his deputy could afford not to reply. A lecture tour in the US would not add much to their already brilliant international reputation. But what was he to do, a humble doctor from far-off Siberia? Buteyko's mind unwillingly went back to the list of candidates for the Supreme Soviet that he'd seen a couple of months ago. The president of the Siberian branch of the Academy of Sciences had been on it, along with a short biography. Lavrentiev had been born in 1900 to the family of a teacher from Kazan, considered members of the intelligentsia at that time. In 1922, as the Civil War was drawing to a close, he graduated from Moscow University. he showed particular aptitude for mathematics and theoretical mechanics and gained his PhD and Doctor of Sciences degrees. In 1939, he was first elected a member of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences and shortly afterwards became its president. A year later, he became a full member of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Buteyko had an exceptional memory and remembered Lavrentyev's biography almost by heart. In the 1950s, Lavrentiev worked in Moscow as the director of the Institute of Precision Mechanics and Computer Engineering, and in 1952, the year of Buteyko's discovery, he became a party member. He was one of the first scientists to move to Novosibirsk in 1957, when construction was beginning, and he soon became the president of the Siberian branch of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Buteyko recalled that according to the biography, Lavrentiev had mentored a cohort of top mathematicians and engineers who had on many occasions brilliantly represented Soviet science abroad. So why was the president now refusing to promote the achievements of Soviet science in the US? It was all right for Lavrentiev, thought the doctor. He had 3 orders of Lenin and 4 orders of the Red Banner of Labour and had twice won the state prize for his outstanding contributions to science and technology. Turning down a lecture tour in the US was no skin off his nose. It was a different matter for Buteyko. He hadn't received anything but persecution from the proponents of orthodox medicine. How else could he feel? Someone with plenty of food can refuse a crust of bread, but someone who's starving will die without it. Where was the much-vaunted fairness in the system? Looking back over seemingly disconnected events, the hounding of Dr. Nevzorova and the virtual prohibition of his overseas trip, Buteyko realized that the successful preliminary trial of the method had not dispelled the clouds hanging over him. Of course, the official hadn't been told what to say by Professor Promekin or even Martinov, but those in authority based decisions on their opinion, and of course, they had their own machinations and intrigues. The doctor knew this deep down, but even he couldn't foresee the consequences of his failure to respond to the invitation from Chicago. His enforced silence would play into the hands of the big shots in American pharmacology. His discovery, which made drugs superfluous, was like a knife to their throats. Even the meagre articles from the Soviet press about his work had provoked a frenzied reaction. They would turn his silence to their own advantage. If he didn't reply, they would say that meant he hadn't got anything to say. He was just another charlatan. However, it wouldn't be enough to badmouth him. It was better to destroy a dangerous opponent, even just a potential one. It would be best of all if someone else could do their dirty work. A trip to the US by a highly placed Soviet doctor in the anti-Buteyko camp was like manna from heaven to the US medical and pharmaceutical industries. They would give the boulder that had long been threatening to come down on Buteyko a very gentle nudge.